The rain had been coming down for 6 hours straight by the time I pulled my truck onto the shoulder of Route 9 outside Denver, and I remember thinking it was the kind of rain that made a man feel like the whole. Sky had personal business with him. My name is Owen Tate. I'm 38 years old, and I drive long-haul freight for a living, which means I spend more nights alone in a cab than most men spend alone in their entire lives. That night, I was hauling a load of restaurant equipment up from Colorado Springs, running behind schedule because of the storm, and I'd stopped to check a tarp strap when I heard someone banging on my passenger window. 2 girls stood there in the downpour, soaked through to the bone. One maybe 19 and the other closer to 16. The older one had dark hair, plastered to her face, and was holding something wrapped in a plastic bag against her chest like it was the only thing keeping her upright. I rolled the window down and she said words I will never forget as long as I live. She said, "Are you Owen Tate?" And when I said yes, confused and a little afraid, she unwrapped the plastic bag and pulled out a worn leather wallet and a folded piece of notebook paper, soaked at the edges, and she said, "Our father wrote your name before he died." I let them into the cab because no decent man leaves 2 soaked, shaking girls standing on the side of a highway in a storm like that. And I drove them to the nearest diner, a 24-hour place called the Wagon Wheel just off the exit. Under the fluorescent lights, dripping onto the vinyl booth seats, the older girl introduced herself as Claire and her sister as Bethany. Their father, she told me, was a man named Richard Hale, and he had died 3 weeks earlier of a heart attack in his garage in Colorado Springs. In his last days, weak and struggling to breathe, he had grabbed a notebook and scrawled 2 things over and over. My name, Owen Tate, and the word Truck Route 9, Denver runs. Claire said she hadn't understood any of it until she found an old photograph tucked in her father's desk drawer, a photograph of a young man who looked almost exactly like me, standing next to Richard outside an auto shop, both of them younger, both of them laughing. I told her honestly that I had never met a Richard Hale in my life. I had grown up in Nebraska, been a trucker for 12 years, and had no family in Colorado at all. No parents, since my mother passed when I was 22 and my father when I was 29. No siblings, nothing. Claire's face felt like she'd been holding onto a rope that just snapped. Bethany, the younger one, started crying quietly, and I felt something crack open in my chest watching her. But Claire wasn't ready to let it go. She pulled out the photograph and slid it across the table. And when I looked at it closely, my stomach dropped. The young man standing next to Richard Hale wasn't just similar to me. The resemblance was uncanny, down to a small scar above the left eyebrow that I have from a bicycle accident when I was 9 years old. I asked her when the photo was taken. She turned it over. Someone had written a date on the back, 19 years ago. I would have been 19 years old. I told her I had no memory of ever going to Colorado at that age. No memory of a garage or an auto shop, nothing. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in my cab in the truck stop parking lot, engine idling for the heat, staring at a photograph of a stranger who wore my face like a mask. Something about it gnawed at me, an itch behind my ribs I couldn't scratch. I called my Aunt Diane the next morning. My mother's younger sister, the only family I had left who might remember anything from that far back. She went quiet on the phone for a long time when I described the photograph. Then she told me something that rearranged everything. I thought I knew about my own life. She told me that when I was a baby, there had been a complication at the hospital, an accidental mix-up that was quietly corrected within days, but not before another set of parents had briefly, mistakenly held me as their own son before the error was caught, and I was returned to my birth parents. Diane said she'd always wondered, in the back of her mind, whether the other family, a young couple passing through Nebraska on their way west, had ever fully let go of that memory. She never knew their names. My parents never spoke of it again after it happened, ashamed or superstitious or simply wanting to bury it. I drove back to that diner the next evening, my mind spinning, and found Claire and Bethany still waiting in a motel room down the road, too afraid to go home to an empty house without answers. I told them what Diane had said. Claire listened with her jaw tight, and then she told me the rest of what she knew about her father. Richard Hale, she said, had never spoken of his past before he married her mother. But in his final year, sick and slowing down, he had started talking in his sleep about a boy he called the other Owen, and about carrying guilt for something that happened decades ago, something involving a hospital and a mix-up he witnessed as a young orderly working nights to pay for community college. It hit me like a truck brake failing on a mountain grade. Richard Hale hadn't been my father. Richard Hale had been the young hospital orderly who witnessed the mix-up, who perhaps even facilitated correcting it, and who had carried the weight of that near miss with him his entire life, wondering what would have happened if the mistake hadn't been caught, wondering about the boy who almost became someone else's son. In his final days dying, his mind unspooling backward through everything that haunted him, He had written down the one name connected to that memory. Mine. Claire cried when I told her this. Not sad tears, but something more complicated. Grief mixed with the strange. Comfort of finally understanding her father's private torment. She said her whole life, Richard had been a good man, steady and kind, but there had always been a shadow behind his eyes, especially late at night. Now she understood why. He hadn't left them a stranger's name out of confusion. He had left them a thread leading back to the one thing he never forgave himself for almost allowing to happen. A child nearly given to the wrong family, and never knowing for certain if the boy that thread led to had grown up all right. I sat with those two girls until nearly midnight in that motel room, and something shifted between us that I can't fully explain except to say that grief and coincidence, when they collide hard enough, can build a bridge between strangers faster than years of friendship ever could. Bethany, quiet the whole time, finally spoke and asked me if I thought their father had been trying to apologize to me. Even though nothing had ever actually happened to me, I told her I thought maybe he was. I told her some men carry weight for things that were never their fault, simply because they were close enough to watch it almost go wrong. Claire asked if I had children of my own. I told her no. A divorce 4 years back, no kids, an ex-wife in Omaha I hadn't spoken to in over a year, and a life spent almost entirely on the road, chasing schedules and delivery windows, with nothing waiting for me at the end of most drives, except an empty apartment and a half-dead houseplant. She looked at me for a long moment and said something I've thought about every day since. She said maybe her father hadn't just left me a name to apologize. Maybe he'd left it as a way of introducing two girls who'd just lost their father to a man who had, in his own way, spent his whole life alone too. I didn't take that as a burden. I took it as an offering. Over the following months, I found myself taking runs through Colorado, springs more often than the job strictly required, stopping to check on Claire and Bethany, helping them sort through their father's affairs, sitting with them through the strange bureaucratic aftermath of losing a parent, insurance forms, a half-finished garage renovation, a mother who had passed years earlier, leaving them with no immediate family besides each other. I wasn't trying to replace anything. I was just there. I taught Bethany how to change a tire in the driveway one Saturday. I helped Claire figure out her father's small business accounts, since I'd kept careful books for my own trucking contracts for years. Slowly, without either of us naming it out loud, I became something neither of us had a word for. Not father, not family by blood, but something steady in a life that had lost its center. It's been 8 months now since that rainy night on Route 9. Claire started community college in the spring, studying nursing, and told me once, half joking, that she wanted to work in the same hospital wing her father used to work in, as if closing some invisible loop. Bethany still calls me sometimes just to talk about nothing. A bad day at school, a song she likes, whether I think she should get a dog. I still drive my routes, still spend nights in the cab under fluorescent truck stop lights, but the drive through Colorado Springs feels different now. It feels like driving towards something instead of just driving through. I never got to meet Richard Hale. I never got to ask him what he saw that night in the hospital corridor decades ago, or what it cost him to carry that secret silently for the rest of his life. But I think about him often, a stranger who spent his whole life quietly, grieving a mistake that was corrected before it ever became a tragedy, and who, in his final fading hours, reached across all those years to leave behind not an apology, but a connection. 2 girls knocked on my truck window in the rain that night looking for their father's ghost. What they found instead, and what I found in them, was something neither of us knew we'd been missing. A family built not from blood, but from the strange, quiet mercy of a stranger's guilty conscience finally set free.